The silk dress felt like a straitjacket as I stood frozen in the marble foyer of Rosewood Manor, watching my fiancé Derek explain to his family that I had suddenly lost my hearing and ability to speak after a severe allergic reaction to medication. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly it terrified me. What terrified me more was how quickly his mother Victoria's face shifted from concern to something else entirely. Relief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The whole charade had started 3 weeks earlier when I overheard a phone conversation that shattered my world. Derek was laughing with his best friend Tyler, describing me as his temporary solution until someone more suitable came along, someone who could properly fit into the Wolfe family's pharmaceutical empire legacy. The words echoed in my mind as I stood there that evening, watching his family's reactions to my supposed condition. I had arrived at Derek's penthouse apartment early that Tuesday afternoon, expecting to surprise him with lunch from his favorite restaurant downtown. We were supposed to finalize the last details for our wedding, which was now just 3 weeks away. Instead of finding him reviewing seating charts or discussing flowers, I discovered him on the phone in his study, speaking in hushed but animated tones. "Trust me, Tyler, this whole thing is temporary," Derek was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of conspiracy he used when he thought no one was listening. "Natalie's sweet and all, but she's not exactly Wolfe material. Mother's been making that clear for months." I pressed myself against the hallway wall, the takeout containers growing heavy in my hands as I strained to hear more. My heart hammered against my ribs with such force I was certain Derek would hear it from across the apartment. "The thing is," Derek continued, "she's been useful for my image at the firm. Dating someone from a modest background shows I'm down to earth, you know? But long-term, come on. Mother's already identified several candidates from pharmaceutical families who would be much better matches. I just need to get through this charity gala season, then I'll figure out how to extract myself gracefully." The takeout containers slipped from my numb fingers, crashing to the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire apartment. Derek's conversation stopped abruptly. I stood there amid scattered containers of pad thai and spring rolls, my entire world tilting sideways. "Natalie?" Derek called out, his voice suddenly bright and loving. "Is that you, sweetheart?" I couldn't respond. 3 years of my life, countless hours spent trying to win over his family, sacrificing my own comfort and authenticity to fit into their world, and it had all been an elaborate performance on his part. I managed to call out something about cleaning up the mess and escaping to his kitchen, but my mind was reeling. That evening, Derek took me to dinner at Cedar Valley Country Club, the same place where we'd had our first official date as an engaged couple. He was especially attentive, holding my hand across the white linen tablecloth and discussing wedding details with enthusiasm that now felt calculated and hollow. Every smile, every gentle touch, every loving word felt like another layer of deception. As he talked about our honeymoon plans, I found myself studying his face, searching for signs of the man who had so casually dismissed our entire relationship as temporary. The Derek sitting across from me seemed genuine, devoted, excited about our future together. But I now knew it was all an act, and he was apparently very good at acting. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, squeezing my hand. "Everything all right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. How do you confront someone about a conversation they don't know you overheard? How do you ask your fiancé if he's planning to leave you without revealing that you've discovered his secret? Instead, I excused myself to the restroom and called my best friend Rachel from a corner booth in the ladies' lounge. Rachel had never particularly liked Derek, though she'd kept her concerns mostly to herself out of respect for my feelings. "Rachel," I whispered into the phone, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always," she replied, her voice immediately concerned. "What's going on? Do you think Derek really loves me?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know, even before Rachel spoke. "Natalie, what happened? Did he do something?" I couldn't bring myself to repeat Derek's words, but I managed to convey that I had serious doubts about his commitment and his family's acceptance of me. Rachel listened without judgment, asking careful questions that helped me articulate feelings I'd been suppressing for months. "You know what's always bothered me about him?" Rachel said finally. "He never defends you when his family makes those little comments. He just laughs them off or changes the subject." She was right. Derek's mother, Victoria, had a talent for delivering criticism disguised as concern, and Derek never challenged her. When Victoria suggested I needed a more sophisticated wardrobe, Derek had agreed and offered to take me shopping. When she questioned whether my graphic design career was substantial enough for someone in Derek's position, he'd merely shrugged and said we'd figure it out after the wedding. I had rationalized these incidents as Derek trying to keep peace in his family. But Rachel's observation forced me to see a different pattern. Derek wasn't protecting me from his family's judgment, he was enabling it. That night, lying awake beside Derek in his king-sized bed, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to test them. All of them. I needed to know what Derek and his family really thought about me, when they believed I couldn't hear or respond to their comments. The plan formed gradually over the next few days. I would pretend to have sudden hearing loss and muteness, supposedly caused by an allergic reaction to a new medication I'd been prescribed for chronic headaches. The condition would be temporary but serious enough to require medical attention and potentially affect our wedding plans. My research into sudden sensorineural hearing loss revealed that it could indeed be caused by certain medications and might be accompanied by temporary speech difficulties due to the psychological impact of sudden deafness. The condition was rare enough that most people wouldn't know much about it, but believable enough to fool a family that, despite their pharmaceutical connections, weren't medical professionals themselves. I spent hours practicing in my apartment, learning to communicate through gestures and written notes. I studied the way truly deaf individuals moved through the world, understanding that my performance needed to be convincing not just visually, but in the subtle ways I would navigate conversations and social situations. The most challenging part was preparing myself emotionally for what I might hear. I suspected Derek's family harbored negative feelings about me, but I wasn't prepared for the depth of their disdain, or the casual cruelty of their observations when they thought I couldn't hear them. Dr. Margaret Thornton, a family friend and respected physician who had known the Wolfes for decades, inadvertently became my ally when I scheduled an appointment at her practice. I had intended to simply establish a paper trail for my supposed condition, but Dr. Thornton's reaction to my fabricated symptoms revealed an unexpected depth of character. "Natalie," she said during what was supposed to be a routine consultation, "I've known the Wolfe family for many years. May I speak candidly with you?" I nodded, uncertain where this was heading. "I've watched Derek grow up and I've seen how his mother operates. Victoria Wolfe is a formidable woman, but she can also be quite ruthless when it comes to protecting what she sees as the family's interests." Dr. Thornton's words carried a weight that suggested she knew more about the family dynamics than she was saying. Her concern seemed genuine, and for a moment I considered abandoning my deception and simply confiding in her about what I'd overheard. Instead, I stuck to my plan, explaining my sudden hearing loss and speech difficulties. Dr. Thornton examined me thoroughly, her professional demeanor masking whatever personal concerns she might have had. When she found no physical evidence of hearing loss, I explained that the symptoms were intermittent and that other specialists had suggested stress might be exacerbating the condition. Stress can indeed impact recovery from sudden hearing loss. Dr. Thornton agreed, though her eyes held a knowing look that made me wonder if she suspected something more complex was happening. "I'll provide documentation of your condition and recommend that you avoid stressful situations while you recover." She handed me a medical report that would serve as perfect cover for my deception, but she also gave me her direct phone number with instructions to call if I needed anything at all, regardless of the time. Quote,
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Sometimes," she said as I prepared to leave, "the most important medicine is having someone you can trust when the world becomes overwhelming." Her words stayed with me as I drove home to my small apartment in the Riverside district. Unlike Derek's penthouse with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, my place was modest but comfortable, filled with my own artwork and photographs from travels Derek had never shown interest in joining. That evening, I called Derek and implemented the first phase of my plan. Using a slightly altered voice, I explained that I'd had a severe allergic reaction to a new medication and was experiencing sudden hearing loss and difficulty speaking. The symptoms had come on rapidly, and I was frightened and confused. Derek's immediate response was everything I had hoped for from the man I'd planned to marry. He rushed to my apartment, held me while I cried, and insisted on staying with me through the night. He Googled my symptoms, called his mother to ask about pharmaceutical side effects, and scheduled appointments with specialists. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had misjudged him entirely. Perhaps the conversation I'd overheard was just typical pre-wedding anxiety, the kind of doubt that many couples experience. Perhaps Derek really did love me and was simply processing his own fears about marriage in an unfortunate way. But then Victoria Wolfe arrived. Derek had called his mother despite my protests, insisting that her connections in the pharmaceutical industry might provide valuable insights into my condition. Victoria swept into my apartment like an elegant hurricane, her designer coat and perfectly styled silver hair, making my modest living space look even smaller and shabbier by comparison. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, embracing me with the kind of hug that managed to convey both sympathy and superiority. "How absolutely dreadful this must be for you." I nodded mutely, playing my part while watching her examine my apartment with barely concealed disdain. Her gaze lingered on my collection of vintage cameras, my grandmother's quilt draped over the couch, and the small stack of graphic design books on my coffee table. "Derek, darling," Victoria said, turning to her son, "we need to discuss the practical implications of this situation." She spoke as if I weren't in the room, which I realized was exactly how she had always treated me. The difference now was that she believed I couldn't hear her casual dismissal of my presence and importance. "The charity gala is this weekend," Victoria continued. "The Pemberton Foundation dinner is next week, and the Pharmaceutical Industry Awards are the following weekend. We simply cannot afford to have Natalie's condition become a distraction from these important events." Derek shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his mother and me. "Mother, Natalie's health is more important than social events." Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cold. "Of course, dear. I'm simply thinking about what's best for everyone involved. Perhaps Natalie would be more comfortable recovering at home while you handle these professional obligations alone." I watched Derek's face carefully as he considered his mother's suggestion. The Derek who had rushed to comfort me the night before seemed to be warring with the Derek who valued his family's approval above all else. "I think," Derek said slowly, "that Natalie should come to the charity gala. Dr. Thornton said social interaction might actually help with her recovery." Victoria's smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. How thoughtful of Margaret to say so. Though I do wonder if she's considered how challenging it might be for Natalie to navigate such a complex social event in her current condition. The way Victoria emphasized quote, "current condition" made it clear that she viewed my hearing loss as inconvenient rather than tragic. More telling was her assumption that I would be unable to handle a social situation that, under normal circumstances, I navigated regularly. "We'll manage," Derek said firmly, and I felt a surge of gratitude toward him that was immediately tempered by the realization that he was defending his decision rather than defending me. After Victoria left, Derek held me close on the couch and stroked my hair while I pretended to sleep. In the quiet darkness of my apartment, he made several phone calls that I wasn't supposed to hear. The first was to Tyler, his best friend and confidant. "It's really bad timing," Derek was saying in hushed tones. "Mother's right that the gala will be challenging, but I can't exactly abandon Natalie when she's dealing with this medical crisis." Tyler's response was inaudible, but Derek's next words made his friend's position clear. "I know the Anderson girl will be there with her family. And yes, I remember what Mother said about her father's pharmaceutical patents. But what am I supposed to do? Break up with Natalie while she's deaf and mute? That would make me look like a monster." The casual way Derek discussed my condition as an inconvenience to his social climbing was like a knife to my chest. But worse was his reference to the Anderson girl and her father's pharmaceutical patents. Clearly, Victoria had already identified my replacement, and Derek was well aware of the arrangement. His second call was to his sister Cassie, who was driving down from her law practice in the state capital to attend the charity gala. "Cassie, I need you to help me manage Mother this weekend," Derek said. "She's already making comments about Natalie's condition being problematic for our image." Cassie's response was longer, and Derek's replies revealed the general content of their conversation. "No, the doctors say it could be weeks before her hearing returns completely. Maybe longer. Yes, I understand this complicates the wedding timeline. Of course I've thought about postponing, but that would raise questions I'm not ready to answer." That last comment confirmed my worst fears. Derek wasn't just considering ending our relationship. He was actively planning for it. The only question was timing and methodology. As I lay there pretending to sleep, Derek's hand still stroking my hair in what I had once found comforting, I realized that my test had already revealed everything I needed to know. The challenge now was deciding how far I was willing to take this deception to fully expose the depth of their betrayal. The Wolfe family charity gala was held annually at Rosewood Manor, their sprawling estate in Millbrook Heights. The event raised money for pharmaceutical research and served as a networking opportunity for industry leaders, wealthy socialites, and political figures. Derek had described it as the social event of the season, and attending as his fiancé had once felt like an honor. Now, as I selected an appropriate dress for the evening, it felt like preparing for battle. I chose a midnight blue silk dress that Derek had bought for me during one of our shopping trips with his mother. Victoria had selected it, claiming it would be, quote, for formal Wolfe family events. At the time, I had been flattered by her attention to my wardrobe. Now I understood that she had been dressing me to fit her vision of what Derek's partner should look like, at least temporarily. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I would be wearing Victoria's choice of dress while exposing her true feelings about my place in the family. Dr. Thornton had provided me with a small, discreet recording device disguised as a hearing aid, along with professional documentation of my condition that would satisfy any curious medical professionals at the event. She had also given me a crash course in lip reading, though she cautioned that my skills would be limited after such a short period of study. "Be careful, Natalie," she had said during our final preparation meeting. "The Wolfe family has considerable influence in this community. Whatever you're planning, make sure you're prepared for the consequences." Her warning suggested that she knew more about my situation than I had revealed, but she didn't press for details. Instead, she simply ensured that I had everything I needed to safely navigate the evening while maintaining my deception. As Derek and I drove through the gates of Rosewood Manor that Saturday evening, I was struck by the property's intimidating grandeur. The main house was a massive stone structure that seemed designed to impress rather than welcome, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and lit by elegant outdoor lighting that made the entire estate glow against the darkening sky. "You look beautiful tonight," Derek said as we pulled up to the valet station. "Are you feeling up to this?" I smiled and nodded, squeezing his hand in what I hoped appeared to be grateful affection. Derek had been attentive and caring all week, and part of me desperately wanted to believe that his overheard conversation had been an aberration, a moment of cold feet that didn't reflect his true feelings. But I had committed to discovering the truth, and tonight would provide the perfect opportunity to observe the Wolfe family's unguarded behavior when they believed I couldn't hear their conversations. The manor's interior was even more impressive than its exterior, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that belonged in museums. Guests moved through the reception areas in elegant evening wear, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that would normally have intimidated me. Tonight, however, my supposed hearing loss provided an unexpected shield against the social anxiety I usually felt at these events. I could observe without feeling obligated to participate, watch facial expressions and body language without the distraction of trying to follow complex conversations. Victoria and Harold Wolfe stood near the main staircase, greeting guests with practiced charm. Victoria wore a stunning emerald gown that probably cost more than my annual rent, while Harold looked distinguished in his tailored tuxedo. They were every inch the pharmaceutical industry power couple, and their ease in this environment was evident in every gesture and smile. When they saw Derek and me approaching, their reactions were subtly but significantly different. Harold's smile was warm and genuine, his concern about my condition appearing sincere as he took my hands and spoke slowly, making sure I could read his lips as he expressed sympathy and support. Victoria's performance was more complex. Her smile was perfect, her words of concern appropriately sympathetic, but her eyes held a calculating quality that made my skin crawl. She embraced me carefully, as if my condition might be contagious, and her questions about my recovery were phrased in a way that suggested she hoped for a quick resolution to this inconvenient situation. "Dr. Thornton called to check on you," Victoria said, speaking clearly for my benefit. "She's here tonight, actually. I'm sure she'll want to say hello." Derek guided me through the crowd, introducing me to guests and explaining my condition with a mixture of protectiveness and embarrassment that revealed his own discomfort with the situation. Some guests responded with genuine sympathy and made efforts to communicate with me directly. Others simply nodded politely and redirected their conversations to Derek, effectively dismissing my presence. The most revealing interactions, however, were with the other young women in attendance. I quickly identified the Anderson girl that Derek and Tyler had discussed. Lindsay Anderson was exactly what I had expected. Blonde, beautiful, impeccably dressed, and from a pharmaceutical family with significant wealth and industry connections. When Derek introduced me to Lindsay and her parents, I watched carefully as the conversation unfolded. Lindsay's sympathy seemed genuine, but her parents' questions about my condition and prognosis felt more like a medical evaluation than social pleasantries. "Such a shame this happened so close to your wedding," Mrs. Anderson said to Derek, her tone suggesting that my condition was an inconvenience he would need to manage rather than a tragedy he was helping me through. "We're hoping for a full recovery soon," Derek replied, but his words lacked conviction. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by people. Derek would periodically check on me, bringing me champagne and ensuring I was comfortable, but he was clearly more engaged with his conversations with other guests than with monitoring my well-being. This gave me the perfect opportunity to observe the Wolfe family dynamics when they believed I couldn't hear their conversations. The first revelation came during cocktail hour, when I was seated in a corner of the reception room while Derek networked with pharmaceutical executives across the room. Victoria and Cassie, Derek's sister, stood near enough for me to hear their conversation while appearing to be absorbed in watching the other guests. "She looks lost," Cassie observed, glancing in my direction, like a child who wandered into the wrong party. Victoria's laugh was soft but cruel. "That's exactly what she is, darling. Derek's little project. Though I must admit, her current condition does solve several problems for us." "What do you mean?" "Well, we can hardly expect Derek to maintain his social obligations while caring for a disabled fiancé. It would be understandable if he needed to step back from the relationship to focus on his career during such a challenging time." The word "disabled" hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Victoria dismissing my condition as a convenient excuse for Derek to end our relationship, she was using language that revealed her fundamental lack of respect for people with actual disabilities. "Mother, that's cold even for you," Cassie said, though her tone suggested amusement rather than disapproval. "I'm being practical, dear. Derek is 28 years old, with a brilliant career ahead of him. He can't afford to be tied down by someone who requires this level of care and attention, especially someone who is never suitable for our family in the first place." "The Anderson girl does seem more appropriate," Cassie agreed. "Similar background, better connections, and her father's pharmaceutical patents would be valuable for Derek's career advancement." "Exactly. And Lindsay is genuinely interested in Derek, not just his money and status like some people we could mention." I gripped my champagne glass so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. The implication that I was a gold digger was not only insulting, but completely inaccurate. I had my own career, my own apartment, and had never asked Derek for financial support. If anything, I had insisted on paying for my own expenses despite his offers to cover them. But more damaging was their casual discussion of replacing me with Lindsay Anderson as if I were an employee being terminated, rather than a person Derek claimed to love. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Thornton, who approached them with professional courtesy but noticeable coolness. "Victoria, Cassie," Dr. Thornton said, her tone politely formal. "I trust you're both well." "Margaret, how lovely to see you," Victoria replied, though her enthusiasm seemed forced. "We're so grateful for your care of Natalie during this difficult time." "Of course. Though I must say, I'm surprised to see her here tonight. Large social events can be overwhelming for patients dealing with sudden hearing loss." "Derek insisted she come," Victoria said quickly. "Young love, you know. He wants to include her in everything despite the challenges." Dr. Thornton's expression suggested she didn't believe Victoria's explanation, but she simply nodded and moved on to greet other guests. However, she made a point of stopping by my corner to check on me personally. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked, speaking clearly and ensuring I could see her face. "This must be quite overwhelming." I nodded and wrote on a small notepad Derek had provided. "Managing okay. Thank you for checking." Dr. Thornton read my note and patted my hand gently. "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to find me. I'll be here all evening." There was something in her expression that suggested she understood more about my situation than she was saying, and her presence provided a small comfort in an increasingly hostile environment. As dinner was announced and guests began moving toward the formal dining room, I realized that the evening's real revelations were just beginning. The formal dining room at Rosewood Manor was a masterpiece of intimidation, masquerading as elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany tables draped in ivory silk, while massive oil paintings of Wolfe ancestors gazed down disapprovingly from gold-framed perches along the walls. Each place setting featured more silverware than I typically used in a week, and the centerpieces of white orchids and baby's breath must have cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Derek guided me to our assigned table, his hand warm on my lower back in a gesture that once would have made me feel protected and cherished. Now it felt possessive, like he was steering a piece of property rather than supporting his beloved fiancé. Our table mates included Lindsay Anderson and her parents, which I realized was no coincidence, along with several other pharmaceutical industry couples whose names Derek whispered in my ear as introductions. Dr. and Mrs. Peterson owned a chain of specialized pharmacies across 3 states. The Hartwell family had developed several groundbreaking cardiac medications. James Morrison was a patent attorney who specialized in pharmaceutical intellectual property. Everyone at our table represented serious money and industry connections, and my presence as Derek's mute fiancé seemed increasingly awkward as conversations flowed around me. The servers began bringing the first course, a delicate butternut squash soup garnished with crispy sage leaves and a drizzle of truffle oil. Under normal circumstances, I would have complimented the presentation and flavor, perhaps engaging Mrs. Anderson in conversation about the chef's technique, or asking Dr. Peterson about his pharmacy locations. Instead, I sat silently, observing the subtle dynamics playing out around me. Derek was animated and charming, discussing recent developments in pharmaceutical regulations with the men while complimenting the women on their gowns and jewelry. He was working the table like a politician, and his skills were impressive. What struck me most was how natural this seemed for him, how effortlessly he slipped into the role of pharmaceutical heir apparent. "Derek, your mother mentioned you're considering a position with Morrison's patent firm," Mrs. Anderson said, cutting her soup with precise movements. "That's such a smart career move for someone with your background." "I'm exploring several options," Derek replied smoothly. "Patent law offers excellent opportunities, especially with the right connections and support system." His emphasis on support system felt pointed, and I noticed Lindsay smile slightly as he spoke. The implication seemed to be that his current support system might need upgrading. "Family connections are so important in this industry," Dr. Peterson added. "It's really about building dynasties that can weather regulatory changes and market fluctuations. Young people today don't always understand the long-term thinking required." "Absolutely," Derek agreed. "That's why choosing the right life partner is such a crucial decision. You need someone who understands the demands and expectations of pharmaceutical leadership." I nearly choked on my soup. Derek was essentially conducting a job interview for my replacement right in front of me, confident that I couldn't hear the subtext of his comments. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Lindsay leaned forward slightly, her blonde hair catching the chandelier light. "I've always found the pharmaceutical industry fascinating. The balance between profit motivation and genuine desire to help people creates such interesting ethical challenges. Exactly, Derek said, his enthusiasm genuine. It takes sophisticated thinking to navigate those complexities. Not everyone has the intellectual foundation to really grasp the nuances involved. Again, his words felt directed at me, a commentary on my supposed intellectual inadequacy for his world. The Derek I had fallen in love with had never spoken dismissively about my intelligence or education. He had seemed to respect my artistic sensibilities and creative problem-solving skills. But perhaps that respect had always been conditional, dependent on my ability to hear and respond to his subtle put-downs. As the second course arrived, pan-seared halibut with microgreens and citrus reduction, I excused myself to visit the restroom. The ladies' lounge was an opulent space with marble countertops, gilt mirrors, and fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases. I had hoped for a moment of solitude to process what I was learning about Derek and his family, but I was soon joined by Victoria and Cassie. They entered, chatting about the evening's success, their voices echoing off the marble surfaces as they touched up their makeup and adjusted their jewelry. I remained in one of the stalls, the door slightly ajar so I could hear their conversation while remaining hidden. "The Anderson family seems very pleased with Derek," Cassie observed. "Lindsay can barely take her eyes off him." "As it should be," Victoria replied with satisfaction. "I've been cultivating that relationship for months. Lindsay has everything we need in a daughter-in-law: breeding, education, family connections, and most importantly, she understands her role in supporting Derek's ambitions." "What about the current situation?" Cassie asked, and I knew she was referring to me. "Derek seems reluctant to make any decisive moves." Victoria's laugh was sharp and calculated. "Derek has always been sentimental about strays. Remember that dog he insisted on keeping when he was 12? Mangy thing from the shelter that never quite fit with our other animals." The comparison to a shelter dog was devastating enough, but the casual way Victoria dismissed Derek's compassion as weakness revealed the depth of her manipulation. She wasn't just opposed to me personally, she was actively working to suppress any empathetic impulses Derek might have. "The hearing loss situation actually provides perfect cover," Victoria continued. "No one could fault Derek for needing space during such a challenging time. And if the condition proves permanent or leads to other complications, well, that would be understandably difficult for someone in Derek's position to manage long-term. You think he'll actually go through with ending things?" "I'm not leaving it to chance. I've already spoken with Jonathan Pierce about the legal implications of breaking an engagement under these circumstances. Apparently, the medical situation provides excellent grounds for dissolving the relationship without significant financial consequences." My hands trembled as I realized Victoria had consulted the family attorney about ending my engagement to Derek. This wasn't just disapproval or wishful thinking. It was an active campaign to remove me from Derek's life. "What about the wedding deposits?" Cassie asked practically. "Most vendors have disability clauses in their contracts. We should be able to recover the majority of our investments. The venue deposit might be forfeit, but that's a small price to pay for correcting Derek's mistake before it becomes permanent." Their casual discussion of my relationship as a financial miscalculation was perhaps more hurtful than their personal attacks. To Victoria and Cassie, I wasn't even worth hating. I was simply an error to be corrected with minimal losses. "I do feel somewhat sorry for her," Cassie said, though her tone suggested limited sympathy. "She clearly has no idea what's coming. Sympathy is a luxury we can't afford," Victoria replied coldly. "Derek's future is too important to risk on misguided sentimentality. Sometimes the kindest thing is swift, decisive action that prevents prolonged suffering for everyone involved." The bathroom door opened and closed as they left, their conversation ending abruptly. I remained in the stall for several more minutes, struggling to compose myself before returning to the dining room. The hatred I had expected from Derek's family was actually worse in its absence. They didn't hate me enough to consider me a real threat. They simply saw me as an obstacle to be removed efficiently and without unnecessary drama. When I returned to our table, the main course had been served. beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. Derek stood to help me with my chair, his gentlemanly behavior now feeling like performance art. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying just the right note of concern. "You were gone for a while." I nodded and smiled, squeezing his hand in what I hoped appeared to be reassurance, but my mind was racing with the implications of what I had overheard. Victoria wasn't just hoping Derek would end our relationship, she was actively orchestrating it with legal consultation and financial planning. The conversation at our table had shifted to industry gossip while I was away. Someone was discussing a recent merger between two pharmaceutical companies and the potential impact on patent portfolios and market positioning. Derek was fully engaged, his knowledge of the business impressive, and his opinions clearly respected by the other guests. Watching him in this environment, I could see why Victoria was so concerned about his choice of partner. Derek belonged here in a way that I never would. His understanding of pharmaceutical business practices, his comfort with high-stakes financial discussions, and his natural networking abilities made him a perfect fit for this world. But the question remained whether Derek's comfort in this environment came from genuine passion for the pharmaceutical industry or simply from years of conditioning by his mother. The Derek I had fallen in love with had seemed more interested in creative problem-solving and innovative thinking than in profit margins and market dominance. "Natalie designs graphics for several medical device companies," Derek said suddenly, drawing me into the conversation. "She has an interesting perspective on how pharmaceutical marketing could be more effective." His attempt to include me in the discussion was appreciated, but it also felt patronizing. The other guests nodded politely and asked a few perfunctory questions about my work, but their interest was clearly minimal. To them, graphic design was decorative rather than strategic, useful for making products look appealing but irrelevant to serious business decisions. Lindsay Anderson made more effort than the others to engage with me, asking thoughtful questions about my design process and genuinely listening to my written responses. Her kindness made me want to dislike her, but I found myself reluctantly impressed by her intelligence and grace. "I studied art history in college," Lindsay confided during a lull in the broader conversation. "I sometimes wonder what it would be like to pursue creative work instead of following the family business path." Her comment revealed an unexpected depth and suggested that she might understand the sacrifices required to fit into the pharmaceutical world. Perhaps her pursuit of Derek wasn't entirely mercenary. Maybe she was also trying to balance personal desires with family expectations. As dessert was served, chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis and gold leaf garnish, Victoria stood to address the gathered guests. The dining room fell silent as she began speaking about the evening's charitable cause, pharmaceutical research for rare diseases that affected children. "Tonight we celebrate not just scientific achievement, but the partnerships that make breakthrough research possible," Victoria said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "The pharmaceutical industry succeeds when families work together, when shared values create lasting foundations for innovation and progress." Her emphasis on families and shared values felt like a direct commentary on my unsuitability for Derek's world. As she continued her remarks, I noticed several guests glancing in my direction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. "We're particularly proud of our young people who understand the importance of building relationships that strengthen our industry rather than compromise it," Victoria continued. "The next generation of pharmaceutical leaders will face unprecedented challenges, and they'll need partners who can contribute meaningfully to their success." The message was crystal clear to anyone paying attention. Derek needed a partner who could contribute to his pharmaceutical career, and I was publicly being positioned as someone who could not meet that standard. After dinner, guests moved to the Manor's ballroom for dancing and additional networking. The space was magnificent, with parquet floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers and French doors opening onto terrace gardens illuminated by fairy lights. A small orchestra played classical pieces while guests mingled with drinks and continued their business conversations. Derek led me onto the dance floor for a slow waltz, his arms around me in a way that should have felt romantic but now seemed possessive and performative. Other couples swayed around us, and I could feel eyes watching us with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Derek asked, his breath warm against my ear. "I know this isn't easy with your condition, but you're handling everything beautifully." His praise felt hollow now that I understood his true feelings about our relationship. The Derek holding me close on the dance floor was the same man who had described me as temporary to his best friend and discussed wedding timeline complications with his sister. As we danced, I caught sight of Dr. Thornton standing near the terrace doors, watching us with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly, and I wondered again how much she suspected about my true situation. The evening's most revealing moment came during the charity auction, when Victoria invited Derek to help present the evening's featured item, a week-long pharmaceutical industry conference in Switzerland, complete with luxury accommodations and exclusive networking opportunities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, "I'm delighted to have my son Derek assist with tonight's premier auction item. As many of you know, Derek represents the future of pharmaceutical leadership, and we're excited about the contributions he'll make to our industry." Derek joined his mother on the small stage at one end of the ballroom, looking comfortable and confident in front of the assembled guests. He spoke knowledgeably about the conference's value and the networking opportunities it would provide, his presentation polished and professional. "This conference isn't just about business," Derek said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "It's about building relationships that will define the pharmaceutical industry for decades to come. The connections made during this week often lead to partnerships, marriages, and family dynasties that shape our field." His emphasis on marriages felt deliberate, and I noticed several guests glancing between Derek and Lindsay Anderson, who was standing near the front of the crowd with her parents. The auction proceeded with spirited bidding, the final price reaching nearly $50,000. As Derek helped conclude the presentation, he caught sight of me standing at the back of the room and smiled warmly, as if sharing a private moment across the crowded space. But I now understood that Derek's public displays of affection were exactly that, displays intended for public consumption rather than expressions of genuine feeling. The man on stage presenting auction items was the real Derek, comfortable with wealth and power and concerned primarily with his own advancement within the pharmaceutical industry. As the evening continued, I found myself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by people. Derek would periodically check on me, bringing me champagne and ensuring I was comfortable, but his attention was clearly focused on his networking opportunities rather than my well-being. This gave me the perfect opportunity to observe additional family dynamics and conversations that revealed the true depth of their feelings about me and their plans for Derek's future. During a particularly animated discussion about pharmaceutical patents, I excused myself to sit in a quiet alcove near the ballroom's entrance. From this vantage point, I could observe the party while appearing to rest, which seemed appropriate for someone managing a medical condition. Harold Wolfe, Derek's father, approached my alcove during a break in the dancing. Unlike Victoria and Cassie, Harold had always been kind to me, and his concern about my condition seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Natalie, my dear," he said, settling into the chair beside me and speaking clearly so I could read his lips. "How are you managing this evening? I imagine all the noise and activity must be overwhelming given your current situation." I wrote on my notepad, "Managing well, thank you. Everyone has been very understanding." Harold read my response and patted my hand gently. "Victoria mentioned that your recovery timeline is uncertain. That must be frightening for both you and Derek." His comment seemed like an opening for me to provide more information about my condition, but there was genuine warmth in his expression that made me reluctant to deceive him further. Harold appeared to be the only member of Derek's immediate family who saw me as a person rather than a problem to be solved. "Derek is fortunate to have such a caring partner," Harold continued. "Marriage requires that kind of commitment through difficult times as well as good ones." His words carried weight that suggested he might be speaking from experience with Victoria's calculating nature. I wondered if Harold understood more about his wife's manipulative tendencies than he typically acknowledged. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tyler Brooks, Derek's best friend and confidant. Tyler greeted Harold respectfully before turning his attention to me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Natalie, Derek told me about your condition," Tyler said, speaking slowly and clearly. I can't imagine how challenging this must be, especially with the wedding so close. I wrote. Doctors are hopeful about recovery, but timeline uncertain. Tyler read my response and nodded sympathetically. Medical uncertainty is always difficult. Derek mentioned you might need to postpone some wedding plans while you focus on treatment. This was news to me, since Derek hadn't discussed postponing anything. The comment suggested that Derek had been sharing details about our relationship status with Tyler that he hadn't shared with me. Of course, Derek's career demands are also intensifying, Tyler continued. The Morrison firm opportunity requires significant time investment, and family considerations become more complex when health issues are involved. Tyler's comments felt like preparation for future developments, rather than simple observation about current circumstances. He was laying groundwork for Derek's eventual decision to end our relationship, positioning it as a mutual recognition of incompatible circumstances, rather than abandonment. As Tyler moved on to greet other guests, I realized that Derek's inner circle was already aware of his intentions regarding our relationship. The conversation I had overheard between Derek and Tyler was apparently part of an ongoing discussion about exit strategies and timeline management. The evening's final revelation came near midnight, as guests began departing and the staff started cleaning up. I was gathering my evening bag and wrap when I overheard a conversation between Victoria and Lindsay Anderson's mother near the coat check area. Tonight went exactly as we hoped, Mrs. Anderson was saying. Lindsay was quite impressed with Derek's presentation during the auction. Derek has always been a natural leader, Victoria replied with maternal pride. He just needs the right circumstances to fully realize his potential. The current situation does seem challenging, Mrs. Anderson observed carefully, though I suppose these things often resolve themselves when the parties involved recognize what's truly best for everyone. Precisely. Derek is a compassionate young man, sometimes too compassionate for his own good. But he's also practical when circumstances require decisive action. Lindsay mentioned that Derek seemed very attentive to his fiancé this evening, despite the obvious challenges her condition creates. Victoria's laugh was soft but telling. Derek has always been protective of those he cares about. But caring and committing to a lifetime partnership are different considerations entirely. Of course. And the pharmaceutical industry can be demanding for family members who aren't fully prepared for its requirements. Exactly. Lindsay understands those demands in ways that others simply cannot. Her background provides natural advantages that can't be taught or acquired. Their conversation confirmed my worst suspicions about the evening's true purpose. The charity gala hadn't just been a social event. It had been an audition for Lindsay Anderson as Derek's future wife, with my presence serving as a convenient contrast to highlight her superior suitability. As Derek and I rode home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights, he seemed energized by the evening's success. He discussed various conversations he'd had with pharmaceutical executives, networking opportunities that might prove valuable, and positive feedback about his auction presentation. I think tonight went really well, Derek said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Several people mentioned how impressed they were with your grace under difficult circumstances. His praise felt like consolation prizes offered to someone who had already lost the competition. The Derek sitting beside me in his luxury sedan was flush with professional satisfaction and social validation, his pharmaceutical industry future seeming more secure than ever. But I now understood that his vision of that future didn't include me, and tonight's performance had been as much about positioning himself for his next relationship as maintaining his current one. As we pulled into the parking garage of his penthouse building, I realized that my test had revealed everything I needed to know about Derek and his family. The challenge now was deciding how to use this information to protect myself and expose their deception. The elegant evening gown I was wearing suddenly felt like a costume I was ready to discard, and the silence between Derek and me felt heavy with unspoken truths that would soon demand acknowledgement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had provided all the evidence I needed to understand exactly where I stood in Derek's world and what I needed to do about it. The days following the charity gala felt like living in a house of mirrors, where every interaction with Derek carried multiple layers of meaning that only I could see. He maintained his attentive, caring facade while simultaneously laying the groundwork for our relationship's demise, and the cognitive dissonance was exhausting. Monday morning brought an unexpected visit from Dr. Thornton at my apartment. She arrived unannounced, carrying a medical bag and wearing an expression that suggested this wasn't a routine follow-up appointment. "Natalie," she said as I opened the door, "we need to talk." I gestured her inside, maintaining my mute performance while wondering if she had somehow discovered my deception. Dr. Thornton settled into my living room chair and studied me with the kind of penetrating gaze that suggested years of reading patients who weren't entirely truthful about their symptoms. "I attended the Wolfe charity gala Saturday evening," she said, speaking clearly while watching my reactions. "I observed some concerning dynamics that I feel obligated to address with you." I retrieved my notepad and wrote, "What kind of dynamics?" Dr. Thornton read my response and leaned forward slightly. "The way Derek's family discussed your condition when they believed you couldn't hear them. Their conversation suggested they view your hearing loss as an opportunity rather than a medical crisis requiring support." My heart raced as I realized Dr. Thornton had overheard some of the same conversations that had devastated me. I wrote, "What did you hear exactly?" "Victoria mentioned consulting the family attorney about ending your engagement due to medical complications. Cassie discussed the financial implications of canceling wedding arrangements. Both women spoke about your condition as if it were a convenient excuse for Derek to pursue other relationships." The clinical way Dr. Thornton described their cruelty somehow made it even more shocking. I stared at my notepad, uncertain how to respond without revealing that I had heard the same conversations. "Natalie," Dr. Thornton continued gently, "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've learned to recognize when family dynamics become toxic during medical crises. What I observed Saturday evening troubled me deeply." I wrote, "Derek has been very supportive, very caring." Dr. Thornton read my response and shook her head. "Support and care are demonstrated through consistent action, not just public performance. Has Derek made any concrete plans for accommodating your condition long-term? Has he researched treatment options, consulted additional specialists, or modified your wedding plans to ensure your comfort?" Her questions exposed the superficial nature of Derek's support. He had been attentive and sympathetic, but he hadn't taken any substantive steps to address the practical implications of my supposed condition. His care was performative rather than practical. "I'm also concerned about some medical inconsistencies I've observed," Dr. Thornton added carefully. "Your lip-reading skills seem remarkably advanced for someone who lost their hearing just over a week ago. Your balance and spatial awareness show no signs of the disruption typically associated with sudden sensorineural hearing loss." I felt my face flush as I realized she had been testing me throughout our interactions. Dr. Thornton was too experienced to be fooled by my amateur performance, and her medical training had revealed the flaws in my deception. I wrote, "Are you saying you don't believe my condition is real?" Dr. Thornton read my question and smiled sadly. "I'm saying that whatever is really happening here, you felt the need to create this elaborate scenario for reasons that probably have nothing to do with actual hearing loss." The weight of maintaining my deception suddenly felt unbearable. Dr. Thornton's kindness and professional expertise created a safe space that made me want to confess everything, but I wasn't sure I could trust her with the truth. "Natalie," she said softly, "I've known the Wolfe family for decades. I delivered Derek when he was born, treated his childhood illnesses, and watched him grow up under Victoria's influence. I understand the kind of pressure and manipulation that family is capable of." Her words broke through my remaining resistance. If Dr. Thornton had witnessed Victoria's manipulation for years, she would understand why I felt the need to test Derek and his family's true feelings about me. I set down my notepad and looked directly at her. "My hearing is fine," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from days of disuse. "I overheard Derek telling his friend that our relationship was temporary, that his mother had identified more suitable candidates for his wife. I needed to know what they really thought about me." Dr. Thornton nodded as if she had expected this confession. "And what did you discover?" "Everything you observed and worse. Victoria has been planning to replace me with Lindsay Anderson for months. She's consulted attorneys about breaking our engagement and calculated the financial costs of canceling our wedding. Derek knows about her plans and is actively participating in them." "I'm sorry, dear," Dr. Thornton said with genuine sympathy, "though I can't say I'm surprised. Victoria has always viewed relationships as strategic alliances, rather than emotional connections. She raised Derek to prioritize family advancement over personal feelings. I felt tears starting to form as the full impact of my discoveries hit me. I thought Derek was different. When we first met, he seemed to value my independence and creativity. He said he admired my artistic perspective and wanted to learn from my different background. People often present idealized versions of themselves during courtship, Dr. Thornton observed. But family pressure and social expectations can reveal someone's true priorities when the stakes become real. She reached into her medical bag and withdrew a small recording device, similar to the one she had given me earlier. I took the liberty of documenting some of the conversations I overheard Saturday evening. I thought you might need evidence of what was said. My hands trembled as I accepted the device. Dr. Thornton had been gathering evidence on my behalf, protecting me in ways I hadn't even realized I needed. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I've watched Victoria destroy too many relationships over the years. Derek's father, Harold, is a good man, but he learned long ago to avoid confronting his wife's manipulative behavior. Derek's first serious girlfriend in college was driven away through similar tactics. I won't stand by and watch it happen again to someone who doesn't deserve such treatment." Dr. Thornton's revelation about Derek's college girlfriend suggested a pattern of behavior that made his treatment of me seem less personal and more systematic. Victoria had apparently perfected the art of eliminating unsuitable romantic partners from Derek's life. "What should I do now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the deception surrounding me. "That depends on what you hope to accomplish," Dr. Thornton replied. "Do you want to try salvaging your relationship with Derek, or do you want to protect yourself from further manipulation and emotional abuse?" The question forced me to confront feelings I had been avoiding. Part of me still loved the Derek I had fallen in love with, the man who had seemed genuine and caring during our early relationship. But I was beginning to understand that version of Derek might have been as much of a performance as his current attentive behavior. "I don't think the Derek I fell in love with actually exists," I said slowly. "I think he's been playing a role this entire time, and now he's transitioning to a different role that doesn't include me." Dr. Thornton nodded approvingly. "That's a mature and realistic assessment. The question now is how you want to handle the transition period while protecting your emotional and financial interests." Over the next hour, Dr. Thornton helped me develop a strategy for managing the next phase of my situation. We discussed legal considerations, financial protections, and practical steps for documenting the family's manipulation while maintaining my own dignity and safety. "Continue the hearing loss performance for now," she advised. "It gives you access to information while preventing them from pressuring you into immediate decisions about your relationship. But start making concrete plans for your independence." She also provided me with contact information for several professionals who could help me navigate the complex process of ending an engagement to someone from a wealthy, influential family. "Jonathan Pierce, the attorney Victoria consulted, is excellent but completely loyal to the Wolfe family," Dr. Thornton warned. "You'll need independent legal counsel who can protect your interests without conflicts of loyalty." After Dr. Thornton left, I spent the afternoon reviewing the recordings she had provided and developing a comprehensive plan for exposing Derek's family's manipulation while protecting myself from retaliation. The recordings were damning. Victoria's voice was clearly audible, discussing legal strategies for ending my engagement, calculating financial losses from wedding cancellations, and describing me as an unsuitable burden that Derek needed to discard for his own good. More devastating was Derek's voice on one recording, apparently from a phone conversation Dr. Thornton had overheard him having during the gala. He was speaking to someone about timeline management and exit strategies, his tone businesslike and detached as he discussed the end of our relationship. "The hearing loss actually simplifies things," Derek was saying. "It provides natural justification for needing space and reconsidering our future together. No one can fault me for being practical about long-term compatibility when medical complications create legitimate concerns." Hearing Derek reduce our 3-year relationship to a logistics problem was perhaps more painful than discovering his mother's manipulative plotting. Victoria's cruelty was expected, but Derek's casual dismissal of our love felt like betrayal of the deepest kind. That evening, Derek arrived at my apartment with dinner from my favorite restaurant and flowers that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. His thoughtfulness felt calculated now, gestures designed to maintain the appearance of devotion while he planned his exit strategy. "You seem tired," he observed as we ate at my small dining table. "Are you feeling all right?" I nodded and wrote on my notepad, "Still adjusting to everything. Some days are harder than others." Derek read my response and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I know this is incredibly difficult for you. For both of us, really. The uncertainty about your recovery makes it hard to plan anything." His comment felt like preparation for future conversations about postponing or canceling our wedding. Derek was laying groundwork for presenting these decisions as mutual responses to medical uncertainty rather than unilateral choices he had already made. "I've been thinking about our timeline," Derek continued carefully. "With your condition and the demands of my career transition, maybe we should consider pushing back some of our wedding plans." I wrote, "What kind of timeline were you thinking?" "Maybe we postpone for 6 months or so. Give your hearing time to recover fully and allow me to get established in my new position. It might reduce stress for both of us." Derek's suggestion felt like the beginning of a longer conversation designed to gradually extend our postponement until cancellation became inevitable. He was implementing the exit strategy he had discussed with Tyler, creating space and distance, while maintaining the appearance of concern for my well-being. I wrote, "Whatever you think is best, I don't want my condition to complicate your career opportunities." Derek smiled with what appeared to be relief. "You're so understanding. That's one of the things I've always loved about you." His past tense phrasing felt significant. Derek was already speaking about our relationship as something that belonged to history, rather than something continuing into the future. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Cassie, Derek's sister. She wanted to take me to lunch, ostensibly to check on my recovery progress, but more likely to assess my emotional state and vulnerability for reporting back to Victoria. We met at an upscale bistro in downtown Millbrook Heights, the kind of place where pharmaceutical industry wives conducted their social business over expensive salads and imported water. Cassie had chosen the location carefully, somewhere public enough to appear innocent but private enough for sensitive conversations. "You look well," Cassie observed as we settled into our corner table. "Better than I expected given everything you're dealing with." I smiled and showed her my notepad, explaining that I was gradually adapting to my new limitations. Cassie read my responses with apparent sympathy, though I detected the same calculating quality I had observed in Victoria's expressions. "Derek mentioned that you're considering postponing the wedding," Cassie said carefully. "That must be a difficult decision." I wrote, "We want to make sure we're making the right choices for both of us. Derek's career is so important." Cassie nodded approvingly. "Derek has incredible potential in the pharmaceutical industry. The Morrison firm opportunity could really establish his reputation. It's wise to prioritize his professional development right now." Her emphasis on Derek's career priorities felt like guidance disguised as observation. Cassie was reinforcing the message that Derek's advancement should take precedence over our relationship concerns. "Have you thought about what you'll do during this transition period?" Cassie asked. "Will you stay in Millbrook Heights or perhaps return to your hometown while Derek gets established?" The suggestion that I leave town felt significant. Cassie was testing whether I might voluntarily remove myself from Derek's life, making their manipulation unnecessary. I wrote, "Haven't decided yet. Depends on my recovery progress and what Derek needs from me." Of course. Though sometimes the most loving thing is giving someone space to pursue their dreams without feeling obligated to manage additional responsibilities. Cassie's comment was carefully crafted to sound supportive, while actually encouraging me to end our relationship for Derek's benefit. She was presenting abandonment as sacrifice, making my departure seem like a gift rather than a defeat. Derek has always been sensitive about feeling torn between family obligations and personal desires, Cassie continued. Mother worries that he sometimes makes decisions based on guilt rather than practical considerations. The implication was that Derek was staying with me out of obligation rather than love, and that my presence in his life was preventing him from making choices that would truly make him happy. Over the course of our lunch, Cassie systematically reinforced every concern and insecurity I might have about my relationship with Derek. She presented each observation as helpful insight rather than manipulation. But the cumulative effect was devastating to anyone who wasn't prepared for the assault. I maintained my performance throughout the meal, responding appropriately to Cassie's apparent kindness, while documenting her manipulative tactics for future reference. She was skilled at her craft, perhaps even more subtle than Victoria, in her ability to deliver emotional destruction disguised as sisterly concern. That afternoon, I received a call from Lindsay Anderson. She wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important, and her tone suggested urgency that made me curious despite my suspicions about her motives. We met at a quiet cafe near the university, far from the pharmaceutical industry's usual gathering places. Lindsay looked nervous as she settled into the chair across from me, her usual polish replaced by genuine anxiety. "Natalie," she said, speaking clearly so I could read her lips, "I need to tell you something that you're not going to want to hear." I retrieved my notepad, though something in Lindsay's expression suggested this conversation might be different from what I expected. Derek's mother has been encouraging a relationship between Derek and me for months. She's made it clear that she doesn't consider you suitable for Derek's future, and she's been actively working to end your engagement. Lindsay's honesty caught me completely off guard. I had expected her to maintain the pretense of innocent friendship, rather than openly acknowledge Victoria's manipulation. I wrote, "Why are you telling me this?" Lindsay read my question and sighed heavily. "Because what happened to you at the charity gala was cruel and calculated, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." She explained that Victoria had been cultivating their relationship for months, arranging social events where Lindsay and Derek would interact, while gradually increasing pressure on Derek to question his compatibility with me. "Derek isn't entirely innocent in this," Lindsay added. "He's aware of his mother's preferences and has been responding to her pressure rather than defending your relationship. But I think he's also genuinely confused about what he wants versus what's expected of him." Lindsay's assessment of Derek's complicity was more generous than my own, but her willingness to expose Victoria's manipulation felt genuine. "I wanted you to know because you deserve to make informed decisions about your future," Lindsay continued. "And because I refuse to be someone's backup plan while they destroy another person's happiness." I wrote, "What will you do now?" "I'm withdrawing from whatever game Victoria is playing. My family has plenty of pharmaceutical connections without the Wolfes, and I'd rather find someone who chooses me for myself, rather than for strategic family alliances." Lindsay's decision to remove herself from Victoria's manipulation felt like an unexpected act of solidarity. She was sacrificing potential advantages to protect me from continued emotional abuse. "There's something else you should know," Lindsay said, lowering her voice. "Victoria has been spreading rumors about your condition becoming permanent. She's telling people that you may never fully recover your hearing, and that Derek is struggling with the long-term implications for his career." This revelation explained some of the pitying looks I had received from pharmaceutical industry acquaintances since the charity gala. Victoria wasn't just planning to end my relationship with Derek. She was destroying my reputation within their social circle to ensure I couldn't return even if circumstances changed. As I walked home from my meeting with Lindsay, I realized that my test of Derek's family had revealed manipulation far more extensive and cruel than I had imagined. They weren't just hoping I would disappear. They were actively orchestrating my destruction while maintaining facades of concern and support. The time had come to stop gathering evidence and start implementing consequences for their deception. Dr. Thornton had provided me with the tools and resources I needed to protect myself, and Lindsay's withdrawal from Victoria's schemes had simplified the dynamics I needed to navigate. That evening, as Derek arrived for another dinner of apparent devotion and hidden agenda, I prepared to transition from victim to architect of justice. The mute woman they had dismissed and manipulated was about to find her voice in ways they never anticipated. The week following my conversation with Lindsay Anderson marked a turning point in my approach to the situation. Instead of passively gathering evidence of Derek's family's manipulation, I began actively orchestrating the circumstances that would expose their true nature while protecting my own interests. My first priority was securing independent legal representation. Dr. Thornton had recommended Patricia Williams, a family law attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces and had experience dealing with wealthy families who used their resources to intimidate opponents. Patricia's office was located in a sleek downtown building, far from the pharmaceutical industry's usual legal haunts. "Ms. Harper," Patricia said as I settled into her conference room, "Dr. Thornton briefed me on your situation. Before we proceed, I need to understand your goals. Are you hoping to save your relationship with Derek, or are you planning to end the engagement on your own terms?" I had maintained my hearing loss performance during our initial phone conversation, but Patricia's direct approach and professional demeanor convinced me that honesty would serve me better than continued deception. "I'm planning to end the engagement," I said, my voice still slightly hoarse from days of limited use. "But I want to do it in a way that exposes their manipulation and protects me from retaliation." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Wealthy families often use their resources to control narratives and minimize consequences for their behavior. We need to ensure you have leverage and protection before you reveal your hand." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia helped me understand the legal and financial implications of my situation. Derek and I had kept our finances largely separate during our relationship, which would protect my savings and income from any claims he might make. However, the engagement ring was worth nearly $40,000, and various wedding-related expenses had been paid from joint accounts that complicated the financial picture. "The ring becomes interesting leverage," Patricia explained. "Traditionally, engagement rings are considered conditional gifts contingent on marriage. If Derek breaks the engagement, you typically keep the ring. If you break the engagement, you typically return it. But if you can demonstrate that Derek obtained the engagement through fraud or misrepresentation, the legal landscape changes significantly." Patricia also advised me on documenting the emotional and financial abuse I had experienced, creating a paper trail that would protect me if Derek's family attempted to retaliate through legal action or public defamation. "Wealthy families often respond to exposure by attacking their accusers' credibility and character," Patricia warned. "We need to anticipate their likely responses and prepare countermeasures." My second priority was establishing financial independence from any potential claims Derek might make on shared assets. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and began transferring my personal funds to ensure Derek couldn't access or freeze my resources during any future legal proceedings. I also contacted my landlord about extending my apartment lease, which had been set to expire after our planned wedding. Derek had assumed I would move into his penthouse after marriage, but I now wanted to maintain my own space regardless of how our relationship ended. The emotional preparation was more challenging than the practical arrangements. Despite everything I had learned about Derek's manipulation and his family's cruelty, part of me still grieved for the relationship I had thought we shared. The Derek who had brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and listened to my design ideas with apparent fascination felt real, even though I now understood he had probably been performing rather than genuinely engaging. Dr. Thornton helped me process these conflicted feelings during a follow-up appointment at her office. She had transitioned from medical provider to unofficial therapist, offering insights based on her decades of observing the Wolfe family's impact on the people around them. "Grief for the relationship you thought you had is natural and healthy," she assured me. "The fact that Derek's affection was partly performative doesn't negate your genuine feelings or the positive experiences you shared. You're mourning the loss of hope and possibility, which is a real loss regardless of the circumstances." Her validation helped me separate my legitimate emotional responses from any guilt I might feel about exposing Derek's deception. I wasn't destroying a loving relationship. I was revealing the absence of one. "The most important thing now is ensuring that you regain control of your own narrative," Dr. Thornton added. "The Wolfe family specializes in making people doubt their own perceptions and experiences. Your strength lies in trusting what you've observed and documented." Meanwhile, Derek continued his attentive boyfriend performance, apparently unaware that I had discovered his true intentions. His behavior became increasingly solicitous as we approached the 2-week mark since my supposed hearing loss, as if he were laying extra groundwork for the compassionate care he would claim to have provided when he eventually ended our engagement. "I've been thinking about our wedding postponement," Derek said during dinner at his penthouse Thursday evening. "Maybe we should make it official with the vendors. Lock in the new dates so we don't lose our deposits." His suggestion felt like another step in his gradual exit strategy. Postponing would create distance and time for him to develop his relationship with whatever replacement Victoria had identified, while maintaining the appearance of commitment to our future together. I wrote on my notepad, "What timeline were you thinking? 6 months? A year?" Derek read my question and seemed to consider his response carefully. "Maybe we should be flexible about the timeline. Focus on your recovery and my career transition, then reassess when we have more clarity about both situations." The vagueness of his response confirmed my suspicions. Derek wasn't planning to reschedule our wedding. He was planning to cancel it indefinitely while avoiding the appearance of abandonment. "I hate that your condition has complicated everything," Derek continued, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "But maybe this is an opportunity to make sure we're making the right decisions for our future together." His ability to present manipulation as opportunity was remarkable. Derek was reframing his planned abandonment as mutual reflection, positioning himself as thoughtful and considerate, rather than calculating and cruel. I squeezed his hand and smiled sadly, playing the role of the grateful, understanding fiancé who appreciated his patience with her medical challenges. Inside, I was documenting every word and gesture for the confrontation I was planning. That weekend brought an unexpected development that accelerated my timeline for exposing Derek's deception. Victoria called to invite me to lunch at Cedar Valley Country Club, ostensibly to discuss wedding postponement details but more likely to assess my emotional state, and perhaps encourage me to end the engagement voluntarily. I arrived at the country club wearing a conservative dress and the hearing aid device Dr. Thornton had provided, playing my role perfectly as I met Victoria in the elegant dining room overlooking the golf course. She was already seated at a prime table, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her expression conveying the kind of sympathetic concern that felt calculated rather than genuine. "Natalie, dear," Victoria said as I joined her, speaking clearly and slowly as if addressing a child. "You look so much better than I expected. How are you managing everything?" I smiled and retrieved my notepad, writing, "Some days are easier than others. Derek has been wonderfully supportive." Victoria read my response and nodded with apparent approval. "Derek has always been compassionate, sometimes to his own detriment. He feels so responsible for everyone's happiness." Her comment felt like preparation for future conversations about Derek's need to prioritize his own well-being over mine. Victoria was positioning Derek's eventual abandonment as self-care rather than selfishness. "I wanted to discuss the wedding situation," Victoria continued. "Given the uncertainty about your recovery timeline, Derek mentioned that you're both considering postponement." I wrote, "We want to make sure we're making the right decisions for everyone involved." "How thoughtful of you both. Though I do wonder if postponement might create additional stress rather than resolving it." Victoria's observation felt like a leading question designed to elicit concerns about our relationship's future. She was fishing for signs that I might voluntarily end the engagement rather than deal with continued uncertainty. "Have you considered that Derek's career demands are intensifying at exactly the wrong time for managing medical complications?" Victoria asked. "The Morrison firm opportunity requires significant travel and networking. It would be challenging for Derek to provide the level of support you need while pursuing such demanding professional goals." Her framing of Derek's career ambitions as incompatible with my needs felt like manipulation disguised as practical consideration. Victoria was presenting my medical condition as an obstacle to Derek's success, rather than a challenge that loving partners would navigate together. "I would hate to see Derek's opportunities limited by circumstances beyond anyone's control," Victoria continued. "Sometimes the most loving thing is recognizing when timing isn't right for major life commitments." The suggestion that ending our engagement would be an act of love rather than abandonment was particularly manipulative. Victoria was attempting to convince me that sacrificing my happiness would demonstrate my devotion to Derek's well-being. Throughout our lunch, Victoria systematically reinforced every doubt and insecurity I might have about my relationship with Derek. She presented each concern as helpful insight rather than manipulation, but the cumulative effect was a devastating assault on my confidence and self-worth. "Derek mentioned that you've been discussing timeline flexibility," Victoria said as our main courses arrived. "That seems wise, given all the uncertainties you're both facing." I wrote, "We want to be realistic about what we can handle right now." "Of course. Though I do worry that extended uncertainty might be more stressful than decisive action." Sometimes clarity, even when painful, is kinder than prolonged ambiguity. Victoria was encouraging me to end the engagement immediately rather than continue the postponement charade. She wanted clean resolution that would allow Derek to pursue other relationships without the complication of an ongoing engagement. "Have you thought about what you'll do during this transition period?" Victoria asked. "Will you remain in Millbrook Heights, or might you consider returning to your family while you focus on recovery?" The suggestion that I leave town felt significant. Victoria was testing whether I might remove myself from Derek's life entirely, making their manipulation unnecessary. I wrote, "I haven't made any decisions about location yet. Depends on what Derek needs from me." Victoria's smile became more strained as she read my response. My continued focus on Derek's needs rather than my own independence clearly frustrated her manipulation strategy. "Natalie, dear," Victoria said, leaning forward with apparent concern, "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I'm worried that you're prioritizing Derek's happiness over your own well-being. That kind of self-sacrifice, while admirable, can become unhealthy for both partners." The irony of Victoria counseling me against self-sacrifice, while simultaneously encouraging me to sacrifice my relationship for Derek's benefit, was breathtaking. She was attempting to reframe my devotion as dysfunction while presenting abandonment as self-care. "Derek would want you to consider your own needs and interests," Victoria continued. "He's mentioned feeling guilty about the impact his career demands might have on your recovery process." This was news to me, since Derek had never expressed any such concerns. Victoria was either fabricating Derek's guilt or reporting private conversations where Derek had expressed doubts about our relationship that he hadn't shared with me. "Perhaps it would help to have some space to focus on your health without feeling obligated to manage Derek's career anxieties as well," Victoria suggested. "Distance sometimes provides clarity about what's truly best for everyone involved." By the end of our lunch, Victoria had delivered a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern. She had systematically undermined my confidence in Derek's commitment, questioned my ability to handle his career demands, and suggested that ending our engagement would be an act of love rather than defeat. I maintained my performance throughout the meal, responding appropriately to Victoria's apparent kindness while documenting her manipulative tactics for future reference. She was even more skilled than I had realized, capable of delivering devastating psychological warfare while maintaining the facade of supportive concern. That evening, I called Patricia Williams to report on Victoria's manipulation and accelerate our timeline for confrontation. The lunch conversation had revealed the sophistication of Victoria's psychological tactics and convinced me that waiting longer would only provide more opportunities for her to damage my emotional state. Victoria's approach is textbook emotional abuse, Patricia confirmed after I described our conversation. She's systematically attacking your self-worth while positioning herself as helpful and supportive. This kind of manipulation can cause lasting psychological damage if you're exposed to it much longer. Patricia recommended that we implement our confrontation strategy within the next week, before Victoria's manipulation could further destabilize my emotional equilibrium or convince me to doubt my own perceptions. "We have enough evidence to expose their deception and protect your interests," Patricia assured me. "The recordings Dr. Thornton provided, combined with your documentation of their behavior, create a compelling case for fraud and emotional abuse." The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Derek's father, Harold. He wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important, and his tone suggested genuine concern rather than manipulation. We met at a quiet cafe near the university, far from the pharmaceutical industry's usual gathering places. Harold looked tired and older than I remembered, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching resignation. "Natalie," he said as we settled into a corner table, "I need to apologize for my family's behavior toward you." His directness caught me completely off guard. I had expected Harold to be unaware of Victoria's manipulation, not complicit in it. "I've known about Victoria's campaign against your relationship with Derek for months," Harold continued. "I've also known about Derek's ambivalence and his discussions with Tyler about exit strategies." I retrieved my notepad, though something in Harold's expression suggested he might know more about my situation than he was revealing. "I should have intervened earlier," Harold said. "I should have confronted Victoria about her manipulation and Derek about his cowardice. Instead, I convinced myself that staying out of their business was the respectful approach." Harold's honesty about the family dynamics was refreshing after weeks of deception and manipulation. His willingness to acknowledge their behavior suggested he might be an unexpected ally. I wrote, "Why are you telling me this now?" Harold read my question and sighed heavily. "Because what happened at the charity gala and during your lunch with Victoria crossed lines that I can't ignore anymore. You don't deserve to be treated with such calculated cruelty." He explained that he had been observing Victoria's manipulation tactics for decades, watching her systematically control Derek's relationships and social connections while maintaining the facade of loving support. Victoria destroyed Derek's relationship with his college girlfriend through similar tactics, Harold revealed. She's also interfered with several of his friendships and professional relationships when she decided they didn't serve the family's interests. Harold's confirmation of Victoria's pattern of behavior validated my own observations and made Derek's treatment of me seem less personal and more systematic. "I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know what you're really dealing with," Harold continued. "And because I hope you'll protect yourself from further damage." I wrote, "What would you do in my situation?" Harold considered my question carefully before responding. "I would document everything, protect my own interests, and then expose their manipulation in a way that prevents them from hurting anyone else." His advice aligned perfectly with the strategy Patricia and I had developed. Harold was essentially encouraging me to implement the confrontation plan that would hold Derek and Victoria accountable for their deception. "There's something else you should know," Harold added, lowering his voice. "Victoria has been telling people in our social circle that your hearing loss is permanent and that Derek is struggling with the long-term implications for his career. She's laying groundwork for public sympathy when Derek ends the engagement." This revelation confirmed Lindsay's earlier warning about Victoria's reputation management strategy. She wasn't just planning to end my relationship with Derek. She was ensuring that their social circle would support Derek's decision and view me as an unfortunate casualty rather than a victim of manipulation. "I'm sorry, Natalie," Harold said as we prepared to leave. "You deserve so much better from all of us." His apology felt genuine, but it also highlighted the extent to which Derek's entire family had failed to protect me from Victoria's manipulation. Even Harold, who seemed to understand the dynamics, had chosen passive observation over active intervention. That evening, as I prepared for what I knew would be one of my final performances as Derek's devoted fiancé, I felt a sense of calm determination replacing the anger and hurt that had dominated my emotions for weeks. The time for gathering evidence and building alliances had ended. The time for justice and revelation was about to begin, and I was ready to show Derek and his family exactly what they had underestimated when they dismissed me as a temporary inconvenience to be managed and discarded. Friday evening arrived with the weight of finality. Derek had invited me to dinner at Rosewood Manor for what he described as a family meeting about our future. Though I suspected it was actually the stage Victoria had chosen for encouraging me to end our engagement voluntarily. The irony wasn't lost on me that they had selected their own territory for what they assumed would be my surrender. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing a navy blue dress that projected both dignity and strength. The hearing aid device Dr. Thornton had provided was securely in place, along with the recording equipment Patricia had recommended. Every word spoken in my presence that evening would be documented for the legal proceedings I now knew were inevitable. Derek picked me up at my apartment with his usual attentive charm, though I detected an underlying tension that suggested he knew this evening would be significant. His conversation during the drive to Millbrook Heights was unnaturally cheerful, filled with observations about the weather and updates about his work at the Morrison firm that felt like nervous chatter rather than genuine communication. "Mother's excited to see you," Derek said as we turned through the gates of Rosewood Manor. "She's been worried about how you're handling everything." His comment felt like preparation for Victoria's upcoming performance of maternal concern. Derek was setting expectations for the caring family reception I would receive before they systematically dismantled my confidence and encouraged my departure. The manor looked exactly as imposing as it had during the charity gala, its stone facade and manicured gardens radiating wealth and power in the gathering twilight. But tonight I viewed the intimidating grandeur through different eyes. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the family's status and influence, I saw their ostentatious display of wealth as compensation for their fundamental lack of humanity. Victoria and Harold greeted us in the main foyer, their reactions providing an interesting contrast that revealed the evening's true dynamics. Harold's concern appeared genuine as he asked about my recovery progress and expressed hopes for continued improvement. Victoria's sympathy felt calculated and performative, her questions about my condition carrying undertones that suggested she hoped for negative developments rather than positive ones. "Dinner won't be ready for another hour," Victoria announced as we settled in the living room. "I thought we could chat about some practical matters while we wait." Her phrasing confirmed my suspicions about the evening's purpose. This wasn't a social dinner. It was a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to convince me that ending my engagement to Derek would be best for everyone involved. Cassie arrived shortly after we did, claiming she had driven down from the state capital specifically to see me. Her presence felt strategic rather than coincidental, adding another voice to what I now understood would be a coordinated campaign of manipulation. "You look wonderful, Natalie," Cassie said, settling into an elegant wingback chair across from where Derek and I sat on the silk-upholstered sofa. "Much stronger than I expected, given everything you've been dealing with." Her comment felt like assessment rather than compliment. Cassie was evaluating my emotional state to determine the most effective approach for the conversation they had planned. "We wanted to discuss the wedding situation," Victoria said, accepting a glass of wine from Harold while I declined alcohol to maintain my focus for the recording. "Derek mentioned that you're both feeling uncertain about timeline and logistics." I retrieved my notepad and wrote, "We want to make decisions that are best for everyone involved." Victoria read my response and nodded with apparent understanding. "How thoughtful of you both. Though I do think prolonged uncertainty can be more stressful than decisive action, even when decisions are difficult." Her suggestion that decisive action would reduce stress felt like the opening move in their campaign to convince me that ending the engagement would be merciful rather than cruel. "Derek's career situation has become quite demanding," Cassie added, glancing at her brother with what appeared to be supportive concern. "The Morrison firm opportunity requires extensive travel and networking during exactly the period when you need maximum support for your recovery." Derek shifted uncomfortably beside me, his discomfort suggesting he knew his family was implementing a plan he had agreed to but wasn't entirely comfortable executing. "I feel terrible about the timing," Derek said, reaching for my hand with apparent guilt. "My career demands are intensifying just when you need me most. It feels selfish to pursue these opportunities when you're dealing with such challenges." His performance of conflicted devotion was impressive, presenting his planned abandonment as reluctant sacrifice rather than calculated betrayal. Derek was positioning himself as the victim of unfortunate circumstances rather than the architect of deliberate deception. I wrote, "Your career is important. I don't want to hold you back from opportunities." "See," Victoria said, reading my response with satisfaction. "Natalie understands the complexity of the situation. She's being wonderfully supportive of Derek's professional goals." The way Victoria praised my supposed understanding felt like manipulation disguised as validation. She was reinforcing my willingness to sacrifice my own interests for Derek's advancement, encouraging me to continue down the path of self-denial that would ultimately lead to ending our engagement. "The question is whether it's fair to either of you to maintain an engagement during such an uncertain period," Harold said, his contribution feeling more genuine than the others. Calculated comments. "Sometimes the most loving thing is acknowledging when circumstances make commitment difficult to sustain." Harold's observation carried weight because his concern seemed authentic, rather than manipulative. Unlike Victoria and Cassie, he appeared genuinely conflicted about encouraging the end of our relationship. "We've been thinking about that," Derek said, his voice carrying carefully modulated uncertainty. "Maybe we should consider a formal separation while we both focus on our respective challenges. Give ourselves space to address our individual needs without feeling guilty about the impact on each other." Derek's suggestion of separation felt like the culmination of weeks of gradual preparation. He was presenting the end of our relationship as temporary breathing space rather than permanent abandonment, making the decision seem reasonable and mutual rather than unilateral. I wrote, "What kind of separation were you thinking about?" Derek read my question and seemed to consider his response carefully. Maybe you could take some time to focus entirely on your recovery while I get established in my new position. 6 months or so, with the understanding that we'll reassess our situation once we both have more clarity. The timeline Derek proposed felt significant. 6 months would provide ample opportunity for him to develop relationships with other women, while maintaining the appearance of commitment to our eventual reunion. That seems like a thoughtful approach, Victoria said with approval. It removes pressure from both of you while allowing natural healing and growth to occur. Victoria's endorsement of Derek's separation proposal confirmed that this conversation had been carefully choreographed. They had planned not just the suggestion, but also the family support that would make the decision seem wise and caring, rather than cruel and calculated. I think distance might actually be healthy for both of you, Cassie added. Derek could focus on his career advancement without feeling guilty about divided attention, and you could prioritize your medical recovery without worrying about Derek's professional stress. The way Cassie framed separation as beneficial for both parties was particularly manipulative. She was presenting abandonment as mutual advantage, making Derek's departure seem like a gift to me rather than a betrayal. Throughout their coordinated presentation, I maintained my performance as the understanding, selfless fiancé who wanted only Derek's happiness and success. I nodded thoughtfully at their suggestions, wrote supportive responses about prioritizing Derek's career, and generally reinforced their perception of me as someone who could be manipulated into voluntary surrender. But internally, I was documenting every word and gesture for the confrontation I was preparing to deliver. Their assumption that I couldn't hear their carefully orchestrated manipulation was about to become the foundation of their own destruction. There's another practical consideration, Victoria said as dinner was announced. The Morrison firm has significant social obligations that require a specific kind of partner. Someone who can navigate pharmaceutical industry politics and support Derek's networking needs effectively. Her comment felt like the most direct attack yet on my suitability for Derek's world. Victoria was suggesting that my background and capabilities made me fundamentally incompatible with Derek's professional requirements. Mother, Derek said with mild reproach, though his tone suggested discomfort with her directness rather than disagreement with her assessment. I'm simply being practical, dear, Victoria replied. Natalie deserves honesty about the challenges she would face as Derek's wife in the pharmaceutical industry. The social demands, the networking expectations, the need to represent family interests effectively. Victoria's framing of honesty as cruelty was masterful. She was presenting her systematic destruction of my confidence as helpful preparation for realities I would need to face. During dinner in the Manor's formal dining room, the family continued their campaign with increased sophistication. They discussed Derek's career prospects, the demanding social schedule he would need to maintain, and the specific skills required for success in pharmaceutical industry leadership. Every conversation topic reinforced the message that Derek's future success depended on having a partner who could contribute meaningfully to his professional advancement, and that my background and current medical condition made me unsuitable for that role. The pharmaceutical industry is particularly challenging for family members who aren't from similar backgrounds, Cassie observed as we finished the main course. There are unwritten rules and expectations that can be difficult to navigate without proper preparation. Her comment about unwritten rules felt like code for social class distinctions that would permanently mark me as an outsider in Derek's world. Lindsay Anderson mentioned how much she enjoyed meeting you at the charity gala, Victoria added casually. Such a lovely girl, and so well prepared for pharmaceutical industry life. Her family background gives her natural advantages in social situations. The mention of Lindsay felt like the final piece of their manipulation puzzle. Victoria was subtly introducing Derek's replacement, while suggesting that Lindsay's advantages highlighted my deficiencies. As dessert was served, I realized the time had come to transition from victim to revelator. The family had provided me with extensive evidence of their manipulation, and their assumption that I couldn't hear their coordinated attack had made them careless about revealing their true intentions. I excused myself to visit the restroom, using the opportunity to send a pre-arranged text message to Dr. Thornton and Patricia Williams. The message simply said, "Now," indicating that I was ready to implement the confrontation plan we had developed. When I returned to the dining room, I found the family engaged in hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when they saw me. Their guilty expressions suggested they had been discussing the final phase of their intervention. Natalie, Victoria said with renewed brightness, we were just saying how much we admire your strength during this difficult time. Your grace and understanding have been remarkable. Her praise felt like preparation for the emotional manipulation she was about to deliver. Victoria was building me up before tearing me down, making her subsequent cruelty seem more devastating by contrast. Derek has been struggling with guilt about his career demands, Victoria continued. He's worried that pursuing his professional goals might prevent him from providing the support you need during your recovery. The way Victoria presented Derek's ambition as sacrifice felt like the pinnacle of her manipulative artistry. She was making his planned abandonment seem like noble self-denial rather than selfish calculation. Maybe, Victoria said with apparent reluctance, it would help Derek if you released him from the obligation to choose between his career and your relationship. Give him permission to pursue his dreams without feeling guilty about the impact on your situation. Her suggestion that I voluntarily end our engagement was delivered with such apparent concern that it almost sounded compassionate rather than cruel. Victoria was asking me to destroy my own happiness while presenting it as a generous gift to Derek. The moment had arrived for me to reveal what I had discovered about their true nature and intentions. I looked around the elegant dining room at the three people who had spent weeks systematically destroying my confidence and manipulating my emotions, and I felt a calm determination replace the anger and hurt that had dominated my feelings. I reached up and removed the hearing aid device Dr. Thornton had provided, setting it deliberately on the mahogany table where everyone could see it. Actually, Victoria, I said clearly, my voice strong and steady after weeks of enforced silence, I think it's time we discussed what Derek really wants and what you've all been planning behind my back. The shock on their faces was immediate and complete. Derek's mouth fell open in apparent disbelief, while Victoria's carefully composed expression cracked to reveal the calculating intelligence beneath her maternal facade. Cassie looked between her mother and brother as if trying to understand what had just happened. You can hear, Derek said, his voice barely audible. I've been able to hear everything, I confirmed. Every conversation you thought I couldn't follow. Every plan you made for ending our engagement. Every cruel comment about my unsuitability for your family. I retrieved the recording device from my purse and placed it beside the fake hearing aid. I've also been documenting everything for the past 2 weeks, including your discussion with Tyler about exit strategies, Victoria's consultation with the family attorney about breaking our engagement, and Cassie's assessment of financial implications for wedding cancellations. The silence that followed my revelation was profound. Harold looked stricken, as if he had suspected something like this might happen, but hoped it wouldn't. Derek appeared to be struggling to process the implications of what I had revealed. Victoria's face had gone completely pale, but her eyes held a fury that suggested she was already calculating damage control strategies. This is outrageous, Victoria said finally, her voice shaking with anger. You've been lying to us for weeks, manipulating our emotions and violating our privacy. Her accusation of manipulation was so ironic it was almost funny. I learned from experts, I replied calmly. Your lessons in deception and emotional abuse were very thorough. Natalie, Derek said, reaching toward me across the table, I can explain everything. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the complicated family dynamics. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You've been planning to end our engagement for months, while pretending to love and support me. Your mother has been orchestrating the entire campaign, while maintaining a facade of maternal concern. And you've all been counting on my gratitude and low self-esteem to make me complicit in my own destruction. I stood up from the table, my composure intact despite the emotional magnitude of the moment. What you didn't count on was me having enough self-respect to protect myself and document your behavior. You can't use those recordings, Cassie said, apparently recovering her legal instincts. You obtained them through deception and without consent. They'll never be admissible in court. Actually, I replied, my attorney Patricia Williams disagrees. When someone is being systematically emotionally abused, the law provides certain protections for gathering evidence of that abuse. But more importantly, these recordings won't be needed for legal proceedings. I reached into my purse and withdrew a formal document that Patricia had prepared. This is a detailed account of your family's manipulation, supported by witness statements from Dr. Thornton, Lindsay Anderson, and several other people who observed your behavior. It also includes a complete financial accounting of shared assets and a formal end to our engagement. Derek's face went white as he realized the implications. Natalie, please, we can work this out. I know I've made mistakes, but the mistakes were mine, I said firmly. I mistook performance for genuine feeling, manipulation for love, and calculated cruelty for family dynamics. But I've learned from those mistakes. I placed Derek's engagement ring on the table beside the recording devices. According to my attorney, when an engagement is obtained through fraud and misrepresentation, the ring becomes compensation for emotional damages rather than a conditional gift. Victoria stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. You, manipulative little gold digger, you planned this whole thing to extort money from our family. Her accusation revealed the true depth of her contempt and her fundamental inability to understand that some people might be motivated by dignity rather than money. Actually, I said, reaching into my purse one final time, I've prepared something for you, Victoria. I withdrew a cashier's check made out to the elder abuse prevention organization Dr. Thornton had recommended. The amount equaled the full value of Derek's engagement ring. This donation is being made in honor of your systematic emotional abuse of anyone who threatens your control over Derek's life, I said, placing the check beside the ring. The organization fights exactly the kind of manipulation tactics you've perfected. The gesture was more devastating than keeping the ring would have been. By donating its value to fight elder abuse, I was publicly categorizing Victoria's behavior as the kind of systematic manipulation that required organized resistance. Harold stood slowly, his face showing a mixture of admiration and regret. Natalie, he said quietly, I owe you an apology for not intervening sooner. You handled this with more grace and dignity than any of us deserved. His acknowledgement felt like validation of everything I had endured. At least one member of Derek's family understood the magnitude of what had been done to me. Harold, I said, my voice softening slightly, your support meant more than you know. Having someone in this family treat me like a human being made all the difference. Derek made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Natalie, I know I've hurt you, but there were genuine feelings involved. What we had wasn't entirely fake. I looked at this man I had once planned to marry, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Derek, you're probably right that some of your feelings were genuine, but you chose family approval over personal integrity, financial advancement over authentic love, and social status over human decency. Those choices reveal your true priorities. I gathered my purse and coat, preparing to leave Rosewood Manor for the final time. Your mother raised you to value success over character, and you've accepted that bargain. I hope it brings you the happiness you think you want. As I walked toward the dining room door, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. No one will believe your story, she called after me. Our family has significant influence in this community. We'll ensure that everyone knows about your deception and manipulation. I turned back to face her, feeling completely calm despite the threat she had just delivered. Victoria, I said, I'm not planning to tell anyone our story. Your behavior speaks for itself, and the people who matter have already seen it clearly. Dr. Thornton, Lindsay Anderson, your own husband, and numerous members of your social circle have witnessed your true nature. I paused in the doorway, looking back at the elegant dining room, where 3 people sat surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully constructed manipulation. Besides, I added, I don't need revenge. I have something much more valuable, my freedom, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I'll never again allow anyone to treat me as disposable. Dr. Thornton was waiting in the circular driveway when I emerged from the manor, her car running and her expression showing both concern and pride. She had positioned herself as my extraction plan, ensuring I wouldn't have to depend on Derek for transportation after our confrontation. How do you feel? She asked as I settled into her passenger seat. Free, I said simply, completely and utterly free. As we drove away from Rosewood Manor, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had arrived at Derek's penthouse 3 weeks ago with takeout containers and wedding plans felt like a different person entirely. She had been willing to accept manipulation as love, performance as authenticity, and conditional acceptance as family belonging. The woman leaving the manor tonight understood her own worth and refused to compromise it for anyone's approval. She had learned to recognize manipulation, document abuse, and protect herself from people who saw relationships as strategic advantages rather than human connections. Dr. Thornton drove me to my apartment, where I found a bottle of champagne and a congratulatory note from Patricia Williams. She had been monitoring the situation remotely and was prepared to handle any legal complications that might arise from the evening's revelations. "What will you do now?" Dr. Thornton asked as we sat in my living room, sharing a glass of champagne and processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "I'm going to rebuild my graphic design business," I said. "I'm going to reconnect with friends I neglected while trying to fit into Derek's world. And I'm going to remember that authentic love doesn't require me to sacrifice my dignity or deny my worth." Dr. Thornton smiled with genuine warmth. "You're going to be just fine, Natalie. Better than fine, actually. You're going to be free to become whoever you're meant to be." 6 months later, I received a wedding announcement in the mail. Derek had married Lindsay Anderson in a small ceremony at Cedar Valley Country Club, surrounded by pharmaceutical industry colleagues and family friends. The announcement mentioned Derek's recent promotion to partner at the Morrison firm and Lindsay's involvement in charitable organizations supporting medical research. I felt no sadness reading about Derek's new marriage, only relief that I wasn't the woman standing beside him at that altar. Lindsay had made her choice with full knowledge of Derek's character and family dynamics. Perhaps she would find happiness in that world, or perhaps she would eventually discover what I had learned about the cost of acceptance from people who viewed relationships as transactions. My own life had flourished beyond anything I had imagined possible while trapped in Derek's world of conditional love and calculated acceptance. My graphic design business was thriving, supported by clients who valued creativity over social connections. I had reconnected with friends who appreciated authenticity over performance, and I had learned to trust my own perceptions rather than accepting other people's assessments of my worth. The most important lesson from my experience with Derek's family was understanding that silence isn't always weakness, and speaking up isn't always strength. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen carefully, document thoroughly, and choose your moment for revelation with precision and purpose. I had pretended to be mute to test Derek's family, but in the process, I had found my own voice and learned to use it wisely. The hearing loss that had never existed had taught me to listen more carefully to the people around me and trust what I observed rather than what I was told. The woman who had once been willing to sacrifice her happiness for acceptance had become someone who understood that authentic relationships require mutual respect, genuine care, and shared values. I would never again settle for anything less, and I would never again allow anyone to convince me that I was asking for too much. The silence I had performed had ended, but the wisdom I had gained from listening so carefully would last forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.